All right, for section 8.2, we are going to take a look at trigonometric ratios, and that is a ratio of two sides of a right triangle. So these only work for right triangles, and we'll jump right in here to talk about the three different ratios. The first one is sine, and sine of an angle, so whatever angle we're going to look at, you take the opposite leg and you divide it by the hypotenuse. So the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Then to find the cosine of an angle, you take the adjacent leg, which is the one that's attached to that angle, and divide it by the hypotenuse. And then for the tangent of an angle, we're going to take the opposite and divide it by the adjacent leg. So let's talk about what each one of those means. So opposite means across from. So if I was going to talk about angle C here, this 90-degree angle in this picture, the opposite would be the C, okay? Also, hypotenuse is the opposite of that 90-degree angle. So in this case, the hypotenuse is C. And for instance, if you notice, we don't take the sine of angle C here because we can't, because the opposite is the hypotenuse. So we'd have hypotenuse over hypotenuse, and that would just give us a 1, and that doesn't help us. So if I did angle A here, the opposite would be side A, and the hypotenuse is C. Hypotenuse is always across from that 90-degree angle. All right, and then adjacent, so if I was talking about angle A, the adjacent leg would be this B because it is part of angle A. So adjacent is using one of those legs. And then the hypotenuse would be C, because the hypotenuse of this triangle is C. And then the tangent, again, if we were talking about A, angle A, opposite would be A, the small a, and then the adjacent leg would be B because it's part of angle A. So adjacent is right next to, opposite is across from, and the hypotenuse is the longest leg or across from that 90-degree angle. Now, instead of writing all of those fractions out that I had put a rectangle around and trying to remember those, there's a little saying that we can remember. And I remember this from high school, so I'm going to tell you right now, it will stick with you. And that saying is SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. So it gives you what we need to know. So the first one, S-O-H, is sine, is opposite over hypotenuse. The C stands for cosine, and then it's AH, which is adjacent over hypotenuse. And then the T stands for tangent, and then OA is opposite over adjacent. So if you remember SOHCAHTOA, you don't have to keep going back to that chart on your notes. So example 1 here, we're going to use this triangle off to the side, and we're going to write a trigonometric ratio as a fraction and as a decimal rounded to the nearest hundred. So the sine of R, so remember sine is the SOH, so that means opposite over hypotenuse. So we're talking about angle R, so here's angle R. Opposite would be across from, so that would be 12. And the hypotenuse here is across from the 90-degree angle, which is 13. So the fraction form is 12/13. And then if I divide that, 12 divided by 13, I get roughly 92 hundredths, rounded to the nearest hundred, like the directions say to. Now the cosine is the C. That's C-A-H. So that means adjacent over hypotenuse. So still talking about R, so it's a cosine of R. The adjacent would be the one that, the leg that we're using to make angle R. So that would be that 5. And then the hypotenuse is still going to be, 13. And then to figure out to the nearest hundredth, we divide 5 divided by 13, and we get roughly 0.38. And then our last one is the tangent, and remember that's the TOA. So that is opposite over adjacent. And this time we're doing the tangent of S. So we are looking at angle S here, and the opposite of S would be that 5, and then the adjacent would be the leg coming off, not the hypotenuse, the leg, which would be 12 in this case. So then we have 5 over 12, and if I divide that, I'm going to get approximately 0.42. So example 2, we want to use a special right triangle to write the sine of 60 degrees as a fraction. So the 60-degree angle is right here, and we want to do sine. So remember, that's the so part. That's the opposite over hypotenuse. So if I go back to my picture, opposite that side would be s square roots of 3. And the hypotenuse of this picture is across from the 90-degree angle, so that would be 2s. And now, since we have an s on the top and an s on the bottom, those would cancel out, and we would have square root of 3 over 2. So that would be the simplified fraction written here. All right, example 3 says to use your calculator to find each trigonometric ratio and round to the nearest hundredth. So you are just going to simply hit cosine and then 76 behind that and hit enter and round to the nearest hundredth. So this one is going to be 0.24. Then I'm going to hit sine 8 and enter. And this one's going to be 0.14. And then tangent 82, enter, is going to be 7.12. So that's just using your calculator to find those buttons. All right, example 4, we need to find each length and round to the nearest hundredth. So here we need to find side A, B. So what I'm going to do is write down the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And the tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we're being asked to find side AB here. So we already know this angle measure here is 41. We know it's opposite, and we know it's adjacent side, or we don't know it's adjacent side, but that's what we're being asked to find. So opposite and adjacent, if I look over here at my little cheat part I wrote, the tangent uses opposite and adjacent. So I know that the tangent of angle that is 41 degrees is going to be whatever the opposite is 6.1 over the adjacent, which would be our x, which would be our length of the leg that we're trying to find. So now what we have to do is we have to get rid of this divide by x. So it's 6.1 divided by x. So the opposite of division is multiply. So I'm going to multiply both sides by x. So I'm going to have x times the tangent of 41, and that would equal 61, or 6.1, not 61. Now I want to solve for x, so I have one more thing to do. This is multiply here, so I'm going to divide by the tangent of 41. So the tangents of 41 cancel, and I just have x left. And then in my calculator, I'm going to hit 6.1 divided by tangent 41, and I'm going to hit enter. And that gives me 7.02. So the length of AB is 7.02 inches. Next, I'm going to have to find MP. So I'm going to have to find this. And the angle that we know, this is an opposite. And I notice this 8.7 is across from the 90-degree angle. So that's the hypotenuse. So I know opposite and hypotenuse. So if I go back to my little cheat sheet, that looks like the sine, opposite and hypotenuse. So we're going to say that the sine of 20 degrees is equal to the opposite side, which is x, over the hypotenuse, which is 8.7. So now I have to solve for x. So this side is dividing by 8.7, so I'm going to multiply by 8.7. So the 8.7 cancel here, and I just have x. And then on this side, I can just type in sine of 20, and I'm going to close my parentheses, and then I'm going to times by 87. And I get an answer of 29.76. And these ones are centimeters. And I'm going to go back. I typed in 87 in my calculator, so it's not 29.76. It is actually 2.98 centimeters. That would make more sense compared to if the longest side is 8.7, our other side definitely can't be 29. So I knew there was a mistake. All right. The other one here, we are given the measure of angle Z is 38. And we need to figure out what YZ is, which would be right here, and that is the hypotenuse. So we have hypotenuse that we have to use. We're using this angle, and then this would be adjacent. So we have adjacent and hypotenuse. So if I go back over here, adjacent and hypotenuse is the cosine. So the cosine of 38 is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent would be the 12.6, and the hypotenuse we don't know right now. So I'm going to have to multiply by x. And then I'm going to have to divide by the cosine of 38. So x equals, and then my calculator, 12.6 divided by the cosine of 38. And I get an answer of 15.99 rounded to the nearest hundredth. These are centimeters. All right, now on to example 5. It says a contractor is building a wheelchair ramp for a doorway that is 1.2 feet above the ground. To meet the ADA guidelines, the ramp will make an angle of 4.8 degrees with the ground. To the nearest hundredth of the foot, what is the horizontal distance covered by the ramp? So horizontal is straight across. So we're trying to figure out from C to B, we're trying to figure out that. So we know one angle, and that is 4.8. Oops. We know the opposite. And then the other thing that we're trying to figure out is the adjacent. So opposite and adjacent. So if I scroll back up here, opposite and adjacent is tangent. Oops. So the tangent of 4.8 is the opposite divided by the adjacent. So now in a couple other problems, you saw me multiply by x and then divide by the tangent of 4.8. So I'm going to kind of show you a shortcut, and what we can do is just swap those two. So I'm going to put x equals 1.2 divided by the tangent of 4.8. So these two get swapped. And that is the same thing if I multiplied by x and then divided by tangent of 4.8. This is what I come up with, but I'm trying to save you a little bit of time. So now in my calculator, I'm going to do 1.2 divided by the tangent of 4.8. And that gives me 14.29. And that wanted to the nearest hundredth of a foot. So that is rounded to the nearest hundredth.